Again, it's so good to be with you all here today. Thank you so much for coming and participating in the life of the church. Today, we are really excited to host a guest, and it's a special guest, one that we're so blessed and excited to host. The very recently inaugurated president of Eastern Nazarene College is with us today. Eastern Nazarene College is a Nazarene school that we're affiliated with from our church right outside of Boston in Quincy, Massachusetts. And Dr. Connell was inaugurated just about 2 weeks ago there. And so elected about a year ago, inaugurated about 2 weeks ago. And so he's very new to the community there. And we wanted to show a great welcome of hospitality from our church because of our affiliation and friendship with them, and give him an opportunity to share from his heart with us, and so that we could begin to feel a strong connection to him and the work that he's doing at that school there. Already today, if you're a parent of a teenager, he went down and spoke to your teenagers for just a moment. I think he wanted to talk about college, and they seemed to want to talk about football and basketball. So, that was an interesting experience down there today. But from him here, we're going to hear about the word of the Lord and trust. And so we're looking forward to that. We hope that you'll take a moment after service and greet him and get to know him just a little bit before you go today. Dr. Connell, would you come up and speak to us?
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you, Tim. It is a delight to be here. Before I was in higher education, I was a pastor for about 20 years, and one of the churches that I served this church reminds me of that church very much. We worshiped in a facility much like this one. The dynamism and the culture that I sense here, it was very similar to where I last served. So I feel very much at home, and I'm absolutely honored to be with you today. I feel at home, I guess, except in that football sense, because I probably should underplay the fact that I am from New England, and there is a certain game tonight. The teens were very interested in my thoughts about this game. What I said to them, and I'll say to you, is I am a Ravens fan this morning, okay? So for 3 hours, I am all in. I'm going to get on a plane this afternoon to Logan in Boston. We'll be watching the game tonight in Boston with some friends. I'll let you use your imagination about who I might be rooting for tonight. But this morning, go Ravens, right? Lamar Jackson, come on. He's awesome. He's awesome. So it is a delight to be here, and thank you for the invitation. And any ENC alumni here, by the way? Any ENC grads? There's one. There's maybe a couple more. Elijah Perry is a student from this church, is a student there currently. We love him. He's just outstanding. Mom is here somewhere right here. Mom, is that a Ravens jersey you're wearing? Can I borrow it just for this morning? And then believe me, I'll give it back to you before I get on the plane to Boston. So yeah, as long as it's not a jersey exchange, that's awesome. Well, what does it mean to trust somebody? What does it mean when a father says to his 19-year-old son, "Son, I trust you," and he tosses him the keys to the newly leased SUV and says, "Why don't you take this to college for the year and enjoy it with your buddies?" I have a 19-year-old son. I think it would mean that father has lost his mind. But what if a father really does trust his son like that? Wouldn't it mean, "Son, I trust in your judgment. I trust in the soundness of your decision-making. I trust in your character. I know you to be a person of your word." Add all that up, and it amounts to this thing that we call trust. What does it mean when a wife says to her husband, "I trust you"? A few years ago, when I was pastoring that church I mentioned, I attended a conference for pastors in Las Vegas. Now, you might be wondering, why in the world would a conference for pastors be held in Las Vegas? I don't know the answer to that question. I wondered the same thing. I think the free buffets probably had something to do with it. But what would it mean if, as I was heading out the front door of our house on my way to 3 days in Las Vegas to this conference, my wife Wendy looked deeply in the... I just noticed there's a big picture of me up there. Wow. Can we put a picture of Jesus up or something like that? Or what would it mean if Wendy looked deeply into my eyes on my way to Las Vegas and said, "Jack, I trust you"? Wouldn't it mean the same sorts of things, that she could trust in my character, in my judgment, my decision making, that she could anticipate my love and loyalty and faithfulness to her? Wouldn't it mean those sorts of things? Wouldn't it mean, Jack, if you do anything you shouldn't do, I'm going to scratch your eyes out? But add all that up and it amounts to trust. What does it mean when someone like you and me trusts God? Doesn't it mean the same sorts of things? That we can count on his character, that we rely on the soundness of his decision-making even when we don't understand what he's thinking, that we can anticipate his love and loyalty and faithfulness to us no matter the circumstances. Add all that up and I think it amounts to trust. And it just seems to me that as we are all trying to manage life in this increasingly complex, turbulent, polarized, crazy world in which we live, that at the center of being able to navigate all that with joy and contentment and wisdom is an ever-deepening level of trust in God. Now, you all know that, and you've heard about 1,000 sermons on themes like this, and you're thinking, couldn't this guy from Boston come up with something a little bit more creative to talk about than this? But it seems to me that this idea of trusting God has become a little bit of a cliche in Christian circles, that it's just part of the church speak that we throw around all the time. And so my hope today is to try to give you some very practical day-to-day insight into what it really looks like to trust God. And we're going to do that by looking at 3 quick snapshots from the life of a man who I would consider the Tom Brady of trust. Oh, wait, scratch that. The Lamar Jackson of trust. The Tim Brooks of trust. You insert whatever name you want. The greatest of all time. A man from the Old Testament whose name was Abraham. You're probably somewhat familiar with his story. Abraham's story begins in Genesis chapter 12. He is a 75-year-old, highly successful businessman. Abraham has a luxury house on a cul-de-sac, a BMW convertible in the driveway, private box at Ravens games. His wife, Sarah, wears designer fashions. She loves to sip Chardonnay with her high society friends on her shopping trips, loves to go to the country club. Abe and Sarah are living the good life, except for one pretty profound gap, which is that they are childless. But one day, God introduces himself to Abraham and turns everything upside down. This is Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, which thankfully we're going to put on the screen so we can get rid of that picture of me. Genesis 12, 1 and 2. The Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. Abraham, I want you to be the father of a whole new nation. Abraham, you're going to have children upon children upon children. Abraham, you are at the center of my strategy for worldwide redemption. All you need to do, Abraham, is quit your job, sell your house, give away the BMW, sell the Ravens tickets, rent a U-Haul, uproot your family, and follow me." Well, follow you where, God? Well, I can't tell you that. I'll show you that later. For now, just trust me. Well, can you imagine the conversation between Abraham and Sarah later that night? Sarah, darling, God is asking us to move. Well, God who? Which God? Well, I don't know. I didn't catch his name. He didn't introduce himself. Well, move where? Well, I don't know. He didn't tell me. He said he would show us that later. Well, move why? Well, because he's going to save the whole world through us. Abe, honey, what exactly have you been smoking? You know? But at 75 years of age, Abraham and Sarah pack up and go. They leave their home, their friends, their country club, their social status, their private box, their comfort zones, everything they're familiar with, and they end up out in the middle of nowhere at some backwater town. They leave their prestigious Baltimore address and end up in Monkey's Elbow, Kentucky, which is a real town. I looked it up. If anybody's from there, I apologize. But good call to move here, you know. They have followed a God they don't know to a place they have never been on an adventure they can't begin to comprehend. And from this first snapshot of Abraham's story, we learn that one dimension of trusting God in the practical day-to-day of our lives is a four-letter word that makes us all a little bit queasy, I think, and that word is risk. Risk. When our mother sent us out the door for our first day of kindergarten, what did she say to us? Embrace danger, talk to strangers, run with scissors, live on the edge, take risks. No. We are trained right out of the gate. Be very, very careful. Be cautious. Be safe. When our dads taught us how to drive, what did Dad say? Pedal to the metal. Blow right by that guy. Let's weave in and out of that traffic up there. Yellow means go faster. No. Take it slow. Both hands on the wheel. Don't touch the gas pedal unless you absolutely need to. When our first son was born, Wendy and I have 4 children. When our first son was born, we learned that he had and still has hemophilia, that bleeding disorder where his blood doesn't clot very well. And so if you look at pictures of him from his toddler years, we have him in knee pads, elbow pads, and helmets all the time. All the sharp corners in our house, we like duct taped cushioning, padding to all the corners. We basically bubble wrapped our whole house because we wanted to take risk out of the equation as much as we possibly could. One of our highest values, most of us as we go through life, is caution, safety, protection. Eastern Nazarene College has an office of risk management, as we should. And all of this is wise. I'm not suggesting that you teach your kids to drive by suggesting they weave in and out of traffic. But there are times when God calls us to do something that is not the safest option. It involves risk. It's about doing something courageous. It's about showing some moxie. It's about having some guts. Maybe it's the risk involved in patching up a broken relationship. Or the risk involved in telling someone you will not tolerate their abuse anymore. Or finally facing up to some kind of destructive pattern in your own life that you have been too fearful to acknowledge and grapple with. Or leaving a job you're comfortable with. Or stepping into a leadership position here at the church. Or releasing a greater percentage of your financial resources to God's work. Or wearing Patriots gear to the Ravens game tonight, as I understand a certain pastor is doing. I mean, there's risk and then there's craziness, but, you know. I don't know what it might be for you, but friends, trusting God is more than staying in our comfort zones and singing about how we trust God. How much we trust God often involves taking some sort of step to the edge. Some sort of move out of what is typically our lane. Some sort of step that involves courage. Something that makes us a little weak in the knees. As he did for Abraham and Sarah. Snapshot number 2, Genesis 17:1. When Abraham was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to him and said, I am God Almighty. Walk before me faithfully and be blameless. Then I will make my covenant between me and you and will greatly increase your numbers. And let's push the pause button right there. Anybody remember how old Abraham was in snapshot number 1 when God came to him and told him that he would become the father of a great nation? How old was he? 75. How old is he now? 99. So this is, oh my Lord is right. This is 24 years later, and Abraham and Sarah are still childless. Now, I don't know about you, but if I'm 75 years old, Sarah was 65 at that time. So if I'm 75 and my wife is 65, and God tells us we're going to have kids, I'm guessing that's going to happen fairly quickly because the biological clock is on the move. It is winding down. It probably wound down a long time ago. So I imagine back in chapter 15, when Abraham and Sarah got this news, they probably registered at Baby Gap. They started planning the gender reveal party. They're figuring this is going to happen. And here we are 24 years later. There has been no party, no shower. The Sesame Street wallpaper they put up in the spare room is old and faded and tattered. And the crib they bought is still silent and empty after 24 years. How many of you would say you enjoy a nice long wait? We pick the checkout line at the grocery store based on which one we think will go fastest, right? And then when it doesn't, we keep track of who we would have been in all the other lines. Right? Is it not a race, right? We put food in the microwave, at least I put food in the microwave. I punch 45 seconds, and then I stand there tapping my toes thinking, this thing takes forever. Abraham and Sarah have been standing in the line at the grocery store. They've been staring at the microwave for 24 years. And they, by the way, had done their part of the deal. They had picked up and moved. They had taken the risk. And 24 years later, God still has not come through for them. 24 years ago, I did some research. It took me a little while to figure this out. 24 years ago was 1995. It was the year of the O.J. Simpson trial. The top TV show was Seinfeld, and you had to get up off your couch if you wanted to change the channel. Bill Clinton was in his second year as president. Donald Trump was a businessman. You had never sent or received an email. We weren't quite sure what this internet thing was. And Lamar Jackson was not even born yet. He wasn't born until 1997. I looked that up this morning. So imagine that God promised you something in 1995, and you're here this morning, and it still hasn't happened. The story goes that an economics professor once went to the Lord and said, Lord, is it true that 1,000 years for us is just like a minute to you? And the Lord said, yes, that's true. And the economist said, and is it true that $1 million for us is just like a penny to you? And the Lord said, well, yes, that's true. So the economist said, Lord, would you be willing to give me one of those pennies? And the Lord said, sure. Just wait here a minute. If you didn't get that, you're probably a Patriots fan. We always want God's penny. We're not usually too excited about his calendar. But God is simply not a microwave. God is not a drive-through lane. God is not the express checkout line at the grocery store. He often isn't in a rush for reasons that will boggle our minds sometimes. And so sometimes trusting him simply means waiting. Waiting for a prayer to be answered, waiting for a promise to be fulfilled, waiting for a time of trial to be over, waiting for not yet that sometimes feel like not ever. Abraham and Sarah wait for 24 years. But then finally the announcement comes. Abraham, your wife Sarah is going to have a baby. You're going to be 100, Abe. She's going to be 90. But Sarah has a bun in the oven. And do you remember how Abraham, the person often characterized as the man of greatest faith in the entire Old Testament, do you remember how Abraham responded when he heard this news? He started laughing. He just started cracking up at the sheer absurdity of it all. And then he tells Sarah about it, or Sarah hears about it. And do you remember what Sarah's response is? She starts laughing too. They're like two little kids at a slumber party. They can't stop laughing. They can't stop giggling about the whole thing. I love what Frederick Buechner wrote about this giggle fest. He wrote, they're laughing at the idea of a baby being born in the nursing home and Medicare picking up the tab. They're laughing at the sheer impossibility of what God promised. They're laughing because with a part of themselves, they do believe it. They're laughing because they know with another part of themselves, they'd have to be crazy to believe it. They're laughing because if by some crazy chance it does come true, they would really have something to laugh at. They're laughing because when all of Sarah's friends are buying Depends, she's going to be buying Pampers. They're laughing at how both parents and baby will have to eat strained vegetables because there isn't a single tooth in the whole doggone family. And a few months later, 90-year-old Sarah gives birth to a baby boy. And do you remember what God has them name this baby boy? His name is Isaac. And do you remember what that means, that word? It means laughter. Every time they call their son's name. Laughter. So Abraham and Sarah have trusted God enough to take a huge risk. They have trusted God enough to wait 24 years for a promise to be fulfilled. But there is one more snapshot of trust in their journey. It's a few years later now, and believe me, there's not a lot of laughter in this story. This is Genesis 22, verse 1. Sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, Abraham. Here I am, Abraham replied. Then God said, take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain that I will show you. So God asks Abraham to take that son, that only son, that son for whom they had waited for 24 years, that son who is the fulfillment of God's promise to them, that son who is the promise of a great nation, and offer that son up as a sacrifice to God. And you want to talk about trust. The next morning, Abraham gets up early and says, Isaac, come with me. Laughter, come with me. And they begin the long walk to this mountain. Now, we know the end of the story. Many of you probably know the end of the story. You know how it's going to turn out. And so we want to say to Abraham at this moment, Abraham, it's okay. Don't worry. God is not really going to make you kill your son. God is not that kind of God. But we can't tell Abraham that because life doesn't work that way. Verse 6, Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac. And he himself carried the fire and the knife. Why did Abraham himself carry the fire and the knife? Because they're dangerous. He wanted to protect his son. He loved his son. He puts the wood on Isaac's shoulders. And so Isaac has to carry on his own shoulders the wood upon which he will be killed. Does that remind you of anyone else? Verse 7, Isaac knows something isn't quite right, so he says, "Father?" "Yes, my son," Abraham replied. "The fire and wood are here," Isaac said, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham's heart must be absolutely broken at this point in time, but he somehow manages to say, "Well, the Lord will provide." Finally, they get to the place. They get to the mountain, the place where the sacrifice will be made. Abraham builds an altar. He takes the wood off of Isaac's back, places it on the altar, and now it's time. He picks up his son Isaac. He holds on to that body that he held the day he was born. He holds on to that body that he had fed and bathed and burped and rocked to sleep. He held on to that boy who was the fulfillment of God's promise, the central component of God's strategy for worldwide redemption. And he puts him on the altar, and he raises his hand to slay his own son, to slay the promise, to slay the future. Abraham trusts his God one more time. Verse 11. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham." "Boy, am I glad to hear from you," Abraham said. "Here I am," Abraham replied. "Do not lay a hand on the boy," he said. "Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son." Abraham looked up, and there in the thicket he saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called that place, "The Lord will provide." And Abraham learned his final lesson about trust, which is that sometimes trust will require a level of sacrifice that seems to be beyond what we can bear. When my wife Wendy turned 30 years old, this is a long time ago now, don't tell her I said that, we were doctoral students in Kentucky, not Monkey's Elbow, Lexington, Kentucky. And like most doctoral students, young couple in doctoral studies, we didn't have two nickels to rub together, and I was very concerned about how we were going to be able to celebrate her 30th birthday. 30th birthday, big deal. I couldn't afford to buy her a nice present. I couldn't afford even to take her out to dinner. Just did not have it in the checking account. And so I finally managed to scrape together a few dollars, and I said to her, "Honey, how about if for your 30th birthday we go out and have dessert and coffee?" And she understood our financial situation, and she's a wonderful, wonderful woman. And so she said, "Yeah, that would be perfect. That would be great." So on the night of her 30th birthday, we drive into Lexington, Kentucky, and go to a nice restaurant that I had found that was noted for having great desserts. We're walking up to the front door of the restaurant. I see the menu posted there by the side of the door, and I look at the prices on the dessert menu, and it's about $6 or $7 for dessert. This was a few years ago. And I'm doing the math, $6 times 2. I said something about coffee times 2, tax, tip. I got to have something left for the babysitter when I get home. And I didn't have enough. And I said, "Honey, prices here look a little bit steep. How about if we find a less expensive place where we could celebrate your birthday?" And Wendy hung her head a little bit, but yeah, that would be fine. I understand. So we get back in the car, drive around Lexington looking for another place to have coffee and dessert. This was a Sunday night, not a lot of places open. I'm not finding any place. Finally, we drive by a 7-Eleven, and these words come out of my mouth: "I bet we could get something in there." And the minute those words were out, boy, I wanted to push them back in, but they were out. There was nothing I could do at that point in time. I said, well, let's just see what we can find. So we pull into the 7-Eleven. I hold the door open for her. She walks in. I try to I say, look at they have Ho-Hos here. You know, there's Twinkies. There's Nutty Buddies. There's all kinds of, get anything you want, honey. Anything you want. She gets a couple things. I get a couple things. It's $3.40 or whatever. I pay for it. We spend her 30th birthday, this is the actual day of her birthday, in the parking lot of a 7-Eleven eating junk food. There was not a lot of conversation in the car at this point in time. The only sound I remember is the crunching of potato chips. I asked her a while back if she remembered this. She said, "Are you kidding me?" She said, "I had Diet Snapple and Sun Chips that night." She said, "I have never had those again since, and I never will." At least she's not bitter about it, right? I've learned a thing or two in the 25 years since that day. And one of them is that the level of sacrifice you're willing to make for someone says a lot about your heart for that person. And so, guys, pull out the credit card. Call up your best friend and borrow money. Call your mommy and borrow money if you have to. Don't do the convenience store deal ever. Because the level of sacrifice you're willing to make for someone says a whole lot about your heart toward that person. God is not a Diet Snapple and Sun Chips God. We're going to celebrate in just a moment the fact that he gave up his very best for us, his one and only Son. And there are times in our lives when trusting him will involve us doing the very same thing, making some sort of sacrifice that might seem like more than you can bear. And so I'm wondering this morning where God might be calling you to trust him in a new, deeper way. Maybe it has to do with leaving some sort of comfort zone, some sort of risk. Maybe it has to do with re-upping on a willingness to wait. And wait. And then wait some more. Maybe it has to do with some level of sacrifice that God is calling you to. I don't know what it means for you, but I know, based on the authority of God's word, that that's what trust looks like. And I know that learning how to trust God more deeply is at the center of living in this crazy world. And I know that as we trust him, we can count on the fact that just like Abraham did, we will get to the point where we will be able to say with confidence, the Lord has provided. The Lord has provided. And he always will. Amen.